My husband insisted he wanted an open relationship, but he complained when I slept with someone he knew. I'm Rebecca, and I need to tell you about the man I almost married, and how his hypocrisy revealed his true character. At 33, I thought I had life figured out. 8 years with James, the last 2 engaged, with our wedding just 3 months away. Everything seemed perfect, or at least stable enough to build a life on. The changes started gradually about 18 months before our wedding. James began expressing what I initially thought were normal pre-marriage anxieties. He'd wonder aloud if we were truly compatible or just comfortable. He'd question whether we were together by choice or simply by default after so many years. Sometimes I wonder if we really know what we want, he said one evening while we cooked dinner together. Like, we've been together since we were 25. How do we know this is actually what makes us happy versus just what we're used to? Because I'm happy. James, aren't you? I think so. But how can I be sure if I've never really experienced anything else to compare it to? These conversations became more frequent after his best friend Marcus got divorced. Marcus had been married for 12 years when his wife left him for someone she'd met at work. The divorce hit Marcus hard, but within a few months he'd transformed himself. New clothes, new apartment, dating multiple women. James was fascinated by Marcus's reinvention. Marcus says he feels like he's living for the first time in years, James told me after one of their weekly drinks. He said marriage made him forget who he was as an individual. Marcus is processing a painful divorce. James. Of course he's going to romanticize being single right now. Maybe. But he made a point about how people settle into relationships without ever really exploring what else is out there. How can you know you're with the right person if you've never seen what other options exist? I started noticing that James's doubts always intensified after spending time with Marcus. Marcus, who had always been charming and successful with women, was now living the bachelor lifestyle James had never experienced. And James was clearly questioning what he might have missed. The pressure built slowly over 6 months. James would bring up articles he'd read about couples who'd explored non-monogamy before marriage. He'd mentioned statistics about relationship satisfaction and people who wondered what if after committing too early. He'd reference expert opinions about the importance of conscious choice in relationships. I found this interesting study, he'd say, showing me his phone. Couples who had more relationship experience before marriage reported higher satisfaction levels. James, where is this coming from? Are you having second thoughts about us? Not second thoughts, just thoughts. About whether we're together because we're truly right for each other, or because we've never experienced anything else. The conversations always circled back to the same theme. How could we be sure about each other without exploring other options first? James presented it as an intellectual exercise, a way to make our eventual choice more meaningful. But I could see the real motivation underneath. He wanted to experience what Marcus was experiencing, but he didn't want to lose me in the process. 8 weeks before our wedding, James made his proposal official. I think we should try an open relationship, he said one evening, his voice carefully measured. Just temporarily. Just to make sure we're choosing each other for the right reasons. James, we're supposed to get married in 2 months. The venue is booked, the invitations are sent, our families have made travel plans. I know the timing isn't ideal, but isn't it better to be absolutely certain now than to wonder later? What if we get married and then spend years wondering what we missed? I'm not wondering what I missed. I chose you. But how do you know that choice is real if you've never made any other choice? If you've never been desired by other men or experienced different types of connection? The argument that followed lasted hours. James had clearly thought through every possible objection I might raise. When I pointed out the timing, he said postponing the wedding would be more expensive than being sure about our choice. When I said I didn't want to sleep with other people, he said I was letting fear hold me back from growth. When I said this could destroy our relationship, he said a relationship that couldn't survive exploration wasn't worth having. Look, he said finally, I'm not saying I want to leave you. I'm saying I want to choose you consciously, instead of just accepting you by default. This would be temporary. 3 months maximum. And it's not about finding someone better. It's about appreciating what we have more deeply. I spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about his proposal. Part of me recognized the manipulation in his timing and his arguments. But another part of me was terrified that if I refused, James would always wonder what he'd missed. And that wondering would poison our marriage even if we went through with it. Finally, I agreed. Not because I believed in the concept, but because I was exhausted from arguing, and because James had made it clear that my refusal would be interpreted as fear or insecurity. Okay, I said. 3 months. 3. But with clear boundaries. James's face lit up with more excitement than he'd shown about anything related to our relationship in months. That should have been my first warning. What boundaries? He asked. Complete honesty about what we're doing. Protection always. And nothing that risks our health or safety. Of course. And Rebecca? This is going to make us stronger, you'll see. Within days, James had updated his dating profiles and was actively scheduling dates. He approached the whole thing with an organizational efficiency that suggested he'd been planning this for longer than he'd admitted. New clothes appeared in his closet. He started going to the gym more frequently. He even got a new haircut. Just want to put my best foot forward, he explained, when I noticed the changes. The transformation was striking. James had an energy and enthusiasm I hadn't seen in years. The problem was that none of that energy was directed toward me. He was excited about the possibilities ahead of him, not about appreciating what he already had. Within 2 weeks, he was going on 3 or 4 dates per week. He'd come home energized, sometimes staying up late texting with new connections. He'd shower immediately when he got home and would be vague about details when I asked about his evenings. How was your date? I'd ask. Good. Interesting conversation. She's a lawyer. Very different perspective on things. Different how? Just different. Fresh, you know? Sometimes it's nice to talk to someone who doesn't know all your stories already. The casual way he dismissed our shared history stung, as if knowing each other deeply was a limitation rather than an intimacy. Meanwhile, I was struggling to even begin exploring. The idea of dating other men while wearing my engagement ring felt surreal. When friends tried to set me up with people, I declined. When men approached me at coffee shops or bookstores, I felt guilty for even considering their interest. How's your exploration going? James would ask occasionally, though he seemed more relieved than curious when I said I was taking things slowly. Maybe you're being too picky, he suggested after I'd turned down another setup. The point is to experience different types of people, not to find your soulmate. I'm just not comfortable jumping into bed with strangers. You don't have to jump into bed with anyone. Just be open to connection. Be open to seeing what else is out there. But James's own exploration was clearly physical. He was staying out late, coming home with that particular satisfaction of someone who'd been intimate with someone new. He tried to hide it, but after 8 years together, I could read the signs. 6 weeks into the experiment, I finally forced myself to go on a date. A colleague had been trying to set me up with her brother David for months, and I finally said yes. David was attractive, funny, successful, objectively a great catch. But sitting across from him at dinner, all I could think about was how he wasn't James. How his laugh wasn't familiar, how his stories didn't include me, how starting over with someone new felt exhausting rather than exciting. When David walked me to my car and tried to kiss me goodnight, I let him. It was pleasant enough, but it felt like betraying something sacred. I drove home feeling empty rather than exhilarated. How was your date? James asked when I got home. He was already in bed, scrolling through his phone. Fine. Nice guy. Just nice? He was great, actually. Very charming. For the first time since we'd started this experiment, James looked up from his phone with something that might have been concern. Are you going to see him again? I might. Well, good for you. That's what this is about, right? Exploring. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened slightly. James wanted me to explore in theory, but the reality of me actually connecting with someone else clearly bothered him. Over the following weeks, I went on a few more dates with David. He was patient with my obvious emotional unavailability, understanding when I explained that I was figuring some things out. We had good conversations, and I found myself genuinely enjoying his company, though I wasn't ready for anything physical beyond kissing. James, meanwhile, was deeper into his exploration than ever. He was now seeing 3 different women regularly: Sarah, a marketing executive, Jennifer, a yoga instructor, and Amanda, a photographer. He'd developed a rotation system, carefully scheduling his time to maximize his experiences. This is exactly what I needed, he told me one morning over coffee. I'm learning so much about myself, about what I want in a partner. What are you learning? Just, different women bring out different sides of you. You know? Sarah challenges me intellectually. Jennifer is very zen, very present. Amanda is creative and spontaneous. It's fascinating how different relationships can be. And what does that tell you about us? It tells me that what we have is just one type of connection, and now I'll be able to appreciate it more because I understand what else exists. But his behavior suggested otherwise. James seemed less interested in our relationship, not more. He was distracted during our conversations, frequently checking his phone, clearly more invested in his new connections than in examining what we had together. 2 months into the experiment, something shifted. James had been spending more time with Amanda, the photographer. He'd mentioned her more frequently, always with a particular warmth in his voice. When he talked about their dates, he used words like inspiring and alive, words he hadn't used to describe me in years. One evening, he came home later than usual, his clothes slightly rumpled, his hair messed in a way that clearly indicated physical intimacy. But more than that, he had a glow about him that I recognized from the early days of our relationship. He was falling for someone. How was your evening? I asked, though I already knew. Really good. Amanda's incredible. She sees the world in this amazing way. Everything is art to her. Everything has potential for beauty. She sounds special. She is. He caught himself, seeming to remember who he was talking to. I mean, it's just nice to experience a different perspective. But the damage was done. James was developing real feelings for Amanda, and it was obvious to both of us. That's when I made my decision about Marcus. I'd been thinking about him more since this whole experiment started. Marcus had always been attractive, successful, charming. During our years together, I'd noticed how women responded to him, how he carried himself with confidence that James sometimes lacked. But more than that, I'd always sensed an undercurrent of attraction between us that we'd both carefully ignored out of respect for James. Marcus had been supportive during this difficult time, checking in on me occasionally via text to see how I was handling the situation. His messages were always careful, appropriate, but there was a warmth there that felt genuine. How are you holding up with all this craziness? He'd texted a few weeks earlier. It's harder than I expected, I'd replied. James is an idiot if he doesn't realize what he has. The comment had stayed with me. When was the last time James had made me feel like something precious he was lucky to have? The next time Marcus texted to check on me, I suggested we meet for coffee. I could use someone to talk to who understands the situation, I wrote. Of course. Tomorrow afternoon? We met at a quiet cafe downtown. Marcus was waiting when I arrived, standing up when he saw me enter, a small courtesy that James had stopped extending years ago. Rebecca, he said, pulling out my chair. You look beautiful. How are you really doing? Honestly, I feel like I'm watching my fiancé fall in love with someone else while I'm supposed to pretend it's healthy for our relationship. Marcus's expression darkened. He's falling for one of these women? I think so. There's this photographer, Amanda. The way he talks about her? I shrugged, trying to appear casual, though my heart was breaking. Jesus, Rebecca, I'm sorry. When I suggested he explore his options, I never imagined he'd be stupid enough to actually develop feelings for someone else. I looked up sharply. You suggested he explore his options? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I mean, we talked about it. About pre-marriage doubts, whether people settle too early. But I thought he'd get it out of his system and realize how good he has it with you. So this was your idea? Not exactly. James was already questioning things. I told him about how liberated I felt after my divorce, how I wished I'd experienced more before settling down. I stared at him, processing this information. Marcus, do you realize what you've done? Look, I thought James would go on a few dates, remember why he loves you, and come back more committed than ever. I never thought he'd be dumb enough to catch feelings. But you planted the idea. Rebecca, James was already having doubts. I just helped him articulate them. Better he deal with this now than spend your whole marriage wondering what he missed. We sat in silence for a moment, both contemplating the mess that had been created. Can I ask you something? Marcus said finally. Sure. How are you handling all this? Really? I feel invisible. James is so excited about these other women, so energized by new connections. Meanwhile, I feel like I've become part of the furniture. Something he assumes will always be there while he goes off exploring. You're not furniture. Rebecca, you're extraordinary. Any man would be lucky to have your attention. Not any man, apparently. James is an idiot. He's had 8 years to appreciate what he has, and instead he's chasing novelty. But that's his loss. Marcus leaned forward, his voice gentle but intense. Rebecca, you deserve someone who doesn't need to explore other options to realize your worth. You deserve someone who looks at you and thinks, how did I get so lucky? When was the last time James looked at me that way? I don't know, but I look at you that way every time I see you. The words hung between us, charged with possibility and danger. Marcus, I know this is complicated. I know. But Rebecca, I've been attracted to you since the day James introduced us, and watching him take you for granted while he's off playing the field makes me furious. You're his best friend. I am. And that's exactly why this is so hard. Do you know what it's like to watch your friend treat something precious like it's ordinary? We talked for 2 hours, the conversation growing more intimate and charged. Marcus told me about noticing me at parties over the years, about thinking James didn't deserve me, about wishing he'd met me first. I found myself opening up about feeling undesired, unappreciated, like James was doing me a favor by staying with me. You're not ordinary, Rebecca. You're intelligent, beautiful, talented, kind. You're the kind of woman men dream about finding. Then why doesn't James see that? Because James is comfortable. He's had you for so long that he's forgotten you're a choice, not a given. When we parted that afternoon, Marcus hugged me goodbye. Longer than necessary, closer than appropriate. I could feel the attraction crackling between us, dangerous, and tempting. That evening, James came home from another date with Amanda, glowing with the satisfaction of new romance. He barely noticed I was there, disappearing into the shower and then into bed with his phone, texting someone who made him smile in ways I hadn't seen in years. I lay awake that night thinking about Marcus's words, about feeling desired and appreciated, about what it might be like to be with someone who didn't need to explore other options to realize my worth. The next few weeks were a revelation. Marcus and I began texting more frequently, then meeting for coffee, then for longer conversations that stretched into evening. He was everything James had stopped being: attentive, curious, completely focused on me when we were together. "Tell me about your work," he'd say, leaning forward with genuine interest. "What projects are you excited about?" When was the last time James had asked about my work with real curiosity rather than polite obligation? "I love how passionate you get when you talk about design," Marcus said one evening as we walked along the river. "Your whole face lights up. It's beautiful to watch." James used to notice things like that about me. Now he barely looked up from his phone when I talked about anything. The tension between Marcus and me built slowly, carefully. We both knew we were walking toward a line we shouldn't cross, but the attraction was becoming impossible to ignore. More than that, Marcus made me feel like myself again. Interesting, desirable, worth listening to. "Rebecca," he said one evening as we sat in his car after dinner, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I'm falling for you. I know the timing is terrible. I know the situation is impossible, but I can't pretend anymore. Being with you these past few weeks has been the best part of my days." "Marcus, I know you're still engaged. I know James is my friend, but watching him treat you like an option while he's off exploring makes me sick. You deserve so much better than that." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to be with you, really be with you, and I think you want that too." He was right. Over the weeks we'd been spending time together, I'd fallen for Marcus too, not just because he was attractive and charming, but because he saw me, really saw me. He made me feel valuable, desired, interesting, all the things James had slowly stopped making me feel. When Marcus kissed me that night, it felt like coming alive after months of feeling invisible. All the attention, desire, and appreciation I'd been missing was suddenly there, focused entirely on me. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he whispered against my lips. "How long?" "Since the first time I saw you. You were wearing this blue dress at David and Sarah's party 3 years ago. James was checking his phone while you told a story, and I remember thinking he had no idea how incredible the woman standing next to him was. You've been thinking about me for 3 years? I've been trying not to think about you for 3 years. But watching James take you for granted while he's off playing with other women, I can't stay quiet anymore." 2 weeks later, Marcus and I slept together. It was everything physical intimacy should be, but hadn't been with James for years. Passionate, intense, completely present. Marcus made me feel beautiful, desired, cherished in ways I'd forgotten were possible. "You're incredible," he murmured as we lay in his bed afterward. "I can't believe James is stupid enough to risk losing you. He doesn't think he's risking losing me. He thinks I'll wait around while he figures out what he wants. Will you?" I don't know anymore. For 3 weeks, I lived a double life. During the day, I'd come home to James, who was increasingly distracted by his relationship with Amanda. In the evenings, when James was out on his dates, I'd be with Marcus, who made me feel like the center of his universe. The contrast was devastating. James would come home from dates energized and glowing, full of stories about Amanda's creativity and spontaneity. Meanwhile, Marcus would text me throughout the day, remembering details about my projects, asking how I was feeling, making me feel constantly valued. "Amanda has this amazing perspective on art," James told me one morning. "She sees beauty everywhere. It's inspiring to be around someone so positive and creative." That same evening, Marcus said, "I love watching you work on your designs. You get this intense focus, like you're solving puzzles only you can see. It's sexy as hell." James was falling in love with Amanda's novelty. Marcus was falling in love with me as I actually was. But I knew this couldn't continue indefinitely. James's experiment was supposed to end in 2 weeks, and decisions would have to be made. More importantly, the guilt was eating at me. Not guilt about betraying James, he had opened this door, but guilt about the deception, about Marcus betraying his friendship, about the mess we were all creating. That's when I decided it was time for the truth. "James," I said one evening when he came home from another date with Amanda, "we need to talk." "Sure, what's up?" he asked absently, already reaching for his phone. "About our experiment, about what we've both discovered." "Oh, right." He put his phone down, giving me partial attention. "How has it been for you? You've been pretty quiet about your dates lately." "Actually, I've been seeing someone, regularly." James looked surprised. "Really? Who?" "Marcus." The phone slipped from James's hand, clattering onto the coffee table. What did you say? I said I've been seeing Marcus for the past month. James stared at me like I'd slapped him. Marcus? My Marcus? Your best friend, Marcus, yes. But that's... He struggled for words. Rebecca, that's not what this was supposed to be about. What was it supposed to be about? Exploring options with strangers, not sleeping with my best friend. You never specified that strangers were required. You just said we should explore other connections. But Marcus knows about us. He knows we're engaged. Friends don't do that to each other. Friends also don't manipulate each other into open relationships so they can explore other women without guilt. James stood up, pacing now. This is completely different and you know it. How is it different? Because he's my friend. Because there are boundaries. Because you specifically chose the one person who could hurt me most. I chose someone who appreciates me, James. Someone who makes me feel valued instead of taken for granted. Valued? James's voice cracked. Rebecca, you're engaged to me. You're supposed to be valued by me. When? When do you value me, James? When you're texting Amanda during our conversations? When you come home glowing from dates with other women? When you talk about how inspiring and creative your new girlfriends are? That's different. That's just exploration. So is this. I explored and I found someone who sees my worth without needing to shop around first. James slumped back onto the couch, his head in his hands. How could you do this to me? How could I do what? Take advantage of the open relationship you insisted we needed? Exercise the same freedom you've been exercising for 3 months? But not with him. Anyone but him. Why? What makes Marcus different from Amanda or Sarah or Jennifer? James looked up, his eyes wild. Because he's my best friend. Because I trusted him. Because out of all the men in this city, you chose the one who knows exactly how to hurt me. Or maybe I chose the one who actually sees what you've been too blind to see. What's that supposed to mean? It means Marcus recognizes my value without needing a 3-month experiment to figure it out. It means he makes me feel beautiful and interesting and worth fighting for. It means he doesn't need to explore other options to know what he wants. James was quiet for a long moment, processing. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, defeated. Are you leaving me for him? I'm leaving you for me. James, because I finally remembered what I deserve. And it's not someone who needs to date other women to appreciate what he has. But I do appreciate you. This whole thing was about appreciating you more. No, it wasn't. This whole thing was about you wanting to experience what Marcus was experiencing without losing your safety net. You wanted to explore while knowing I'd be here waiting when you were done playing. That's not true, isn't it? James, you've spent 3 months having the time of your life with other women while I sat here feeling like I wasn't enough for you. You've been falling in love with Amanda while treating our relationship like an obligation. I haven't been falling in love with Amanda. Yes, you have. You light up when you talk about her. You're more excited about seeing her than you've been about seeing me in years. You think she's creative and inspiring and spontaneous. All the things you apparently don't think I am. James opened his mouth to argue but closed it again, knowing I was right. So what now? He asked finally. Now you get exactly what you asked for. Freedom to choose. The only difference is that I get to choose too. The next evening, I arranged the confrontation I knew was inevitable. Marcus arrived first, looking tense but resolved. James was already pacing when Marcus walked into our living room. You son of a bitch, James said without preamble. James, let me explain. Explain what? How you convinced me to suggest an open relationship so you could steal my fiancé? Marcus remained calm. I didn't convince you of anything. You came to those conclusions on your own. But you influenced me? You told me about how great it was being single, how much I was missing. I told you how I felt about my own situation. You're the one who decided that meant you should risk your relationship. Risk it? I wasn't risking it. I was exploring while knowing Rebecca would be here when I was done. The words hung in the air, confirming everything I'd suspected about James's mindset. And there it is, I said quietly. You thought I'd wait around while you played the field. James turned to me, his face flushed. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. You wanted to explore your options while keeping me as your backup plan. Rebecca, that's not fair. What's not fair is expecting me to sit here while you fall in love with other women and then act shocked when I find someone who actually values me. Marcus stepped forward. James, do you hear yourself? You're angry because Rebecca found someone who appreciates her while you've been off exploring other relationships? It's different and you know it. How is it different? Because you're my friend. Because I trusted you. Because there are codes, boundaries. What boundaries? You opened your relationship. You told Rebecca to explore other connections. She did exactly what you asked her to do. Not with you. Why not me? James struggled for an answer. Because you get everything. Women, success, options. The one thing I had that you didn't was Rebecca. And now you've taken that too. The admission hung between us like a confession. This wasn't about friendship or betrayal. This was about James feeling like he couldn't compete with Marcus and being furious that his one advantage had been eliminated. So Rebecca was a possession to you? Marcus asked quietly. Something you owned that I couldn't have? That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. You didn't see her as a person making her own choice. You saw her as your territory. I stepped forward. James, listen to yourself. You're not upset because you lost me. You're upset because Marcus won me. I'm upset because my best friend betrayed me. Your best friend fell in love with someone who was available because you made her available. Someone you'd been taking for granted for months. I never took you for granted. You spent 3 months dating other women while making it clear that I was your fallback option. How is that not taking me for granted? James looked between Marcus and me, his face cycling through emotions. Rage, hurt, confusion. So what happens now? He asked finally. Now you deal with the consequences of getting exactly what you asked for, I said. What does that mean? It means you wanted freedom to explore your options. And you got it. You just didn't expect that I'd find a better option while you were looking. A better option? James's voice cracked. Someone who doesn't need to shop around to appreciate what he has. Someone who makes me feel valued instead of taken for granted. Someone who fights for me instead of assuming I'll always be available. Marcus moved closer to me, his hand finding mine. James, I'm sorry about the timing and the circumstances, but I'm not sorry about falling for Rebecca. She's incredible, and frankly, you're an idiot for not seeing that. She was engaged to me. She was engaged to someone who needed permission to appreciate her. That's not the same thing. James slumped into a chair, the fight going out of him. I can't believe this is happening. You made it happen, I said, not unkindly. You opened this door, James. You convinced me that exploring other options would strengthen our relationship. You just assumed I wouldn't find anything better. I thought you loved me. I did love you. But love isn't enough when the other person doesn't value what they have. We sat in heavy silence for several minutes. Did you plan this? James asked Marcus finally. No. I suggested you work through your doubts because I thought you'd realize how good you had it with Rebecca. I never imagined you'd be stupid enough to actually pursue other women seriously. But you wanted her. I've been attracted to her for years. But I never would have acted on it if you hadn't made her available. Made her available? James looked confused. James, you spent months making Rebecca feel like she wasn't enough for you. You criticized her indirectly, made her feel insecure, then asked her to date other men while you fell in love with someone else. You made it clear that she was your backup plan, not your first choice. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you told Rebecca she was beautiful? When was the last time you seemed excited to spend time with her? When was the last time you made her feel like a priority instead of an obligation? James was quiet, unable to answer. Meanwhile, Marcus continued, Rebecca is intelligent, beautiful, funny, talented. Any man would be lucky to have her attention. You just took that for granted. So you decided to take advantage of my mistake? I decided to show her what it feels like to be truly valued. Something you'd apparently forgotten how to do. James looked at me with something like desperation. Rebecca, can't we try to work this out? Call off the wedding, postpone everything, figure this out? James, you spent 3 months showing me exactly how you feel about our relationship. You've been more excited about Amanda than about me. You've treated our engagement like something you needed to test, rather than something you were grateful for. But I love you. You love the security of knowing I'll be there. That's not the same thing as loving me. That's not fair. What's not fair is asking someone to marry you while simultaneously dating other people to make sure they can't do better. Marcus squeezed my hand. Rebecca deserves someone who doesn't need to explore other options to know her worth. And you're that someone? James asked bitterly. I'm someone who's been watching you take an incredible woman for granted for years. I'm someone who knows exactly how lucky I am to have her attention. This is insane, James said, but his voice lacked conviction. This is honest, I replied. For the first time in months, someone is being completely honest about what I deserve. The conversation continued for another hour, but the outcome was inevitable. James had gotten exactly what he'd asked for, the freedom to explore his options. He just hadn't expected me to find something better while he was looking. 3 weeks later, I moved out of the apartment James and I had shared. The wedding was officially canceled, deposits lost, families disappointed. But for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Marcus and I didn't rush into anything serious immediately. We both knew our relationship had been born from complicated circumstances that needed time to resolve. But what we had was real. built on genuine appreciation, mutual respect, and the kind of desire that doesn't require comparison shopping to recognize. 6 months later, James reached out one final time. "I made a mistake," he said when I agreed to meet him for coffee. "I see that now. I had something real with you, and I threw it away because I was curious about what else was out there." "Yes, you did. Can't we try again? I understand now what I lost." "James, you didn't lose me. You gave me away. You spent months convincing me to look elsewhere, and when I found someone who actually valued me, you were shocked. But we had 8 years together. We had 8 years where you gradually took me more and more for granted. This experiment just made that visible. I thought you'd wait for me to finish exploring. I know you did. And that assumption told me everything I needed to know about how you saw me and our relationship. But I love you. You loved having me as your sure thing. That's not the same as loving me." James looked older, diminished. His exploration had ultimately led him exactly where Marcus had predicted, to the realization that he'd had something special and had been too blind to see it. "What about Marcus? Are you happy with him?" "I'm happy with someone who doesn't need to explore other options to know my worth. Someone who chose me and keeps choosing me every day." "But doesn't it bother you that he betrayed our friendship?" "He didn't betray your friendship, James. He fell in love with someone you made available. If you hadn't suggested the open relationship, none of this would have happened. I just wanted to be sure about us. And now you are sure. The question is whether that certainty means anything when it came at the cost of losing what you were trying to protect." James was quiet for a long moment. "Do you think you'll marry him?" "I think I'll marry someone who doesn't need permission to appreciate what he has." A year later, Marcus and I were engaged. Not because we felt pressured by timelines or social expectations, but because we'd built something genuine together. Something based on choice rather than habit. Appreciation rather than assumption. The proposal happened on a quiet Sunday morning in his kitchen while we made breakfast together. No grand gestures, no public displays. Just Marcus looking at me over coffee and saying, "I want to spend my life making sure you never feel taken for granted again." "Is that a proposal?" I asked, laughing. "It's a promise. But yes, it's also a proposal." He pulled out a simple, elegant ring. "Rebecca, will you marry someone who already knows exactly how lucky he is to have you?" The contrast to James's proposal 2 years earlier was stark. James had proposed because it was the expected next step after 6 years together. Marcus proposed because he couldn't imagine his life without me in it. Our wedding was small, intimate, focused on commitment rather than spectacle. During our vows, Marcus said, "I promise to choose you every day, not because you're convenient or familiar, but because you're extraordinary. I promise to see your worth not in comparison to others, but as an absolute truth." When it was my turn, I said, "I promise to never settle for being taken for granted again. And I promise to be with someone who doesn't need permission to love me fully." In the small crowd, I noticed some of our mutual friends looked uncomfortable. James and I had been together for 8 years. Our breakup had created ripples through our social circle. Some people felt I'd moved on too quickly, that I should have tried harder to save my relationship with James. Others whispered about Marcus stealing his best friend's fiancé. But I'd learned something important through this experience. Other people's comfort with your choices is not your responsibility. I'd spent too many years making myself smaller to make James comfortable. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. James had continued dating Amanda for a few months after our breakup, but that relationship eventually fizzled. According to mutual friends, James struggled with the realization that his grass is greener mentality had cost him something irreplaceable. He'd gotten his freedom to explore, but the exploration had taught him exactly the wrong lesson, that what he'd had with me was special not because it was familiar, but because it was rare. 6 months after our wedding, I ran into James at a bookstore downtown. He looked tired, older somehow. The confident energy he'd had during his exploration phase was gone, replaced by something that looked like regret. "Rebecca," he said, approaching cautiously. "Congratulations on the wedding. I heard it was beautiful. Thank you. You look happy." "I am happy." We stood in awkward silence for a moment before James spoke again. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About the choices I made. And I realize I convinced myself that exploring options would make me appreciate what I had. But really, I just wanted to experience what I thought I'd missed without risking what I already had. I know. You were never supposed to find someone else. You were supposed to wait for me to finish playing and then be grateful when I chose you again." The honesty was jarring, even though I'd understood this dynamic all along. "But that's not how choice works," I said. "Real choice requires real risk. You can't explore other options while keeping someone as your backup plan. I see that now. Too late, but I see it. James, what did you think would happen? That I'd sit around waiting while you fell in love with other women? That I'd be there whenever you decided you were done exploring? Yes, he admitted quietly. That's exactly what I thought would happen. Why? Because you'd been there for 8 years. Because you'd never left before. Because I thought your love was unconditional. My love was unconditional. But my presence wasn't. And you confused the two. James nodded slowly. Marcus was right about me taking you for granted. Yes, he was. Does it bother you that he manipulated the situation? That he influenced me to suggest the open relationship so he could have a chance with you? I'd thought about this question many times over the past year. Had Marcus manipulated James? Had he planted seeds knowing they might grow into the destruction of our relationship? I think Marcus saw an opportunity, I said finally. But you gave him that opportunity. If you'd been secure in our relationship, if you'd truly valued what we had, no amount of influence from Marcus could have convinced you to risk it. So you don't blame him? I blame him for not being honest with you about his intentions. But I don't blame him for recognizing that you were taking me for granted and acting accordingly. He should have told me he was interested in you. Would that have changed anything? Would you have suddenly started appreciating me more if you'd known your best friend found me attractive? James was quiet, considering. Probably not. I probably would have just been more paranoid. Exactly. The problem wasn't Marcus's interest in me. The problem was your lack of interest in appreciating what you had. I did appreciate you. You appreciated having me. That's different from appreciating me. We talked for another few minutes before parting ways. As I watched James walk away, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not condescending pity, but genuine sadness for someone who'd learned an important lesson too late to benefit from it. That evening, I told Marcus about the encounter. How do you feel about seeing him? Marcus asked. Sad. Mostly. He looked lost. Do you regret how things happened? I considered the question carefully. I regret that it happened the way it did. I wish James had been able to appreciate what we had without needing to explore other options first. I wish you hadn't had to betray a friendship to be with me, but I don't regret the outcome. Even knowing that our relationship started under complicated circumstances. Our relationship started because you saw something in me that James had stopped seeing. Yes, the circumstances were messy, but what we built together is real. Marcus pulled me closer. I want you to know something. Even if James had never suggested the open relationship, I would have eventually told you how I felt. Really? I couldn't have watched him take you for granted forever. Watching someone incredible be treated as ordinary was killing me. But you were his best friend. I was. And that's exactly why I couldn't stay silent. Do you know what it's like to watch your friend have everything you want and treat it like it's nothing special? You could have talked to him about it. Told him he was taking me for granted. I tried, in subtle ways. But James wasn't interested in hearing that he was failing as a partner. He was more interested in justifying his doubts than addressing them. So you decided to act. I decided to stop protecting someone who wasn't protecting what he had. 2 years into our marriage, Marcus and I faced our first real test. He was offered a job opportunity in another city, a significant career advancement that would require us to relocate. In my previous relationship, I would have automatically supported James's career moves without considering my own needs. But Marcus approached the decision as a team. What do you think? He asked after telling me about the offer. It's an amazing opportunity for you. For us. If we do this, we do it together and it has to work for both of us. What about my clients here? My network? We'll figure it out. Maybe this is a chance for you to expand nationally. Maybe it's an opportunity to try something new. But we decide together. The conversation continued over several weeks. Marcus made it clear that he wouldn't take the job unless I was genuinely excited about the move, not just willing to sacrifice for his career. In the end, we decided to stay. The job was a good opportunity, but our life together was more important than any single career move. Are you sure? I asked when he turned down the offer. I'm sure. I spent too many years watching James prioritize everything except his relationship with you. I'm not making that mistake, but this was important to you. You're more important to me. And besides, the right opportunity will come along again. The right partner doesn't. This was the difference between being valued and being taken for granted. Marcus made decisions with me, not for me or despite me. 3 years after our wedding, we bought a house together. As we signed the mortgage papers, I thought about the home James and I had planned to buy after our wedding. We'd looked at houses, but every conversation had been about what James wanted. Location convenient to his office, style that reflected his taste, budget that prioritized his financial goals. With Marcus, house hunting was a collaboration. We talked about what we both needed in a space, what compromise we were willing to make, how to create a home that reflected both of our personalities. This feels right, Marcus said as we walked through the house that would become ours. It does. You know what I love most about it? What? It's ours. Not mine that you're moving into, not yours that I'm joining. Ours from the beginning. That night, as we celebrated our new home, Marcus said something that stayed with me. I want you to know that I never take for granted that you chose me. Even now, 3 years in, I know you could have chosen someone else. You could choose someone else tomorrow. That possibility keeps me grateful. You don't need to worry about that. I'm not worried. I'm motivated. Knowing that you're with me by choice, not by default or habit, makes me want to be worthy of that choice every day. This was what James had never understood. Love isn't something you earn once and then coast on forever. It's something you choose continuously, and that choice requires ongoing effort to be worthy of. 5 years after our wedding, Marcus and I started trying to have children. The process was more difficult than we'd expected, involving months of testing, treatment, and disappointment. During this stressful time, I saw another fundamental difference between my two relationships. When James and I had faced challenges, financial stress, family drama, career setbacks, he'd often seem to blame me somehow, as if problems were evidence that I wasn't worth the trouble. Marcus, facing the stress of infertility treatments, became more protective and supportive. "This is hard," he said after another negative pregnancy test, "but we're in it together. Sometimes I wonder if you'd be better off with someone else, someone who could give you children easily." Marcus looked at me seriously. "Rebecca, listen to me. I didn't fall in love with your fertility. I fell in love with you. Whatever happens, we'll handle it together. But what if we can't have children? Then we'll build a different kind of family. Through adoption, through being incredible aunts and uncles, through creating a life that's meaningful in other ways. But I'm not going anywhere." After a year of treatment, we successfully conceived. Our daughter was born healthy and perfect. And watching Marcus become a father was like watching him discover a new dimension of himself. "She's incredible," he whispered as he held our daughter for the first time. "She is. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for making me feel worthy of building it." Looking back now, 7 years after leaving James, I can see how that painful experience taught me the most important lesson of my adult life. Never settle for being someone's backup plan, safety net, or default choice. James taught me what it feels like to be taken for granted, to have your worth questioned, to be treated as an option rather than a priority. That experience was painful, but it was also invaluable. It showed me exactly what I didn't want in a relationship. Marcus taught me what it feels like to be truly valued, not despite my flaws, but including them, not as a consolation prize, but as a first choice, not as someone who's lucky to be chosen, but as someone whose choice is the real prize. The irony isn't lost on me that Marcus, who had engineered the situation that ended my engagement, turned out to be exactly the kind of partner I deserved. Someone who didn't need to explore other options to know my worth. Someone who fought for me instead of assuming I'd always be available. James got exactly what he'd asked for. The freedom to explore his options, and the knowledge that comes from comparison. He just learned too late that some knowledge comes at too high a price. I got something I hadn't known I was missing. A partner who sees loving me as a privilege rather than an obligation. Someone who doesn't need permission to appreciate what he has. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is someone forcing you to see what you've been settling for. James's experiment didn't strengthen our relationship as he'd hoped. Instead, it revealed that our relationship had been running on momentum rather than genuine mutual choice. For that revelation, as painful as it was, I'll always be grateful. It freed me to find something real.